Not long ago, talking about African philosophy often required quotation marks, as if to question its legitimacy. The word philosophy, or the term African, was put in quotes to imply that true philosophy was inherently Greek and Western. Eastern traditions were recognized for their major religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam. But African thought was dismissed by Western scholars like Hegel, who denied Africa any significant religion or moral system, branding it as primitive and incapable of sophisticated thought. Philosophers like Nietzsche and Heidegger reinforced this view, arguing that philosophy is fundamentally Greek and Western. However, some researchers have always recognized the greatness of ancient African civilizations. They noted Africa's advancements in metallurgy, pottery, architecture, literature, religion, morality, and law. While many prejudices against Africa have diminished, the same can't be said for African philosophy. Historians have started to debunk the myth that philosophy began with the Greeks, acknowledging influences from Egyptian and Eastern philosophies. African philosophy, as a historical fact, must be understood within the context of African history. Its origins and development are intertwined with the continent's history and have shown connections with other continents, especially Europe, since the Greco-Roman era. In ancient times, African philosophy was primarily centered in the Nile Valley, specifically in Kemet, ancient Egypt, and Kush, Napata, and Meroe. Philosophy flourished in Egypt from around 3400 BC to 343 BC, and in Kush from about 1000 BC to 625 BC. A significant discussion on the connection between ancient Egypt and the rest of Black Africa occurred in 1974 during a UNESCO symposium in Cairo and Aswan. More than 20 leading Egyptologists participated, reaching a consensus on several key points, despite differing on other issues. First, they agreed that the Egyptian language, in its various historical forms, hieroglyphic, hieratic, demotic, and Coptic, and modern African languages are part of the same linguistic family, fragmented over time. Comparative grammar and internal reconstruction methods support this linguistic connection. Contrary to popular belief, the so-called Afro-Asiatic family of languages lacks scientific validation. Second, the symposium affirmed that ancient Egypt was a flourishing kingdom of Northeast Africa, situated in the Nile Valley and not in Asia Minor or the Near East. The Egyptian civilization of the Pharaonic period, 3400 to 343 BC, was intrinsically African in its spirit, character, culture, and thought. Historically, influential thinkers like George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel perpetuated the notion that Africa had no historical significance and that Egypt was not part of the African spirit. This perspective dominated Western historiography for over a century. The 1974 Cairo Symposium marked a pivotal shift in this narrative, challenging Hegel's views and redefining the understanding of African historiography and philosophy. Philosophy can be seen as systematic, reflective thinking about life. Every philosophy is connected to life, society, existence, and the universe. Even abstract concepts like nothingness relate to the universe since it encompasses everything. Humans always seek to understand what is real, true, right, or lasting, which is considered wisdom. The Greeks understood philosophy as the love of wisdom, and a philosopher as a lover of wisdom. Philosophizing involves not just speculation, but a passionate investigation of reality's underlying causes to establish values for society. The essence of philosophy is more important than its methodology. In ancient Egypt, philosophy was about synthesizing all learning and pursuing wisdom and moral and spiritual perfection. Egyptian philosophy was like a pedagogy, sharing wise teachings, sebayit, from scholars, priests, and statesmen. The Egyptian verb rekh means to know or to learn, indicating that knowledge comes through learning and experience. A wise man, that is rekh, is a learned person, an erudite, or a philosopher. The concept of rekhet refers to knowledge or science, emphasizing inquiry into the nature of things with accurate knowledge and good judgment. Wisdom, sai, and prudence, sai, are expressed by the same word, suggesting that being wise involves prudence and good judgment. The wise person loves truth, that is mat, and is shrewd, aware, and intelligent due to formal instruction. Teaching, that is seba, is symbolized by a star, suggesting bringing light to the mind of the pupil. Key Egyptian educational concepts include seba, to teach, at seba, school or house of teaching, seba or sebati, pupil, sebayit, written teaching or wisdom, tepheseb, correct method. These concepts show that Egyptian thought created abstract ideas using concrete symbolism. Egyptians used semiotic structures, relating signs and pictures to ideas and meanings. They developed precise abstract thinking using graphic forms, with some of the earliest abstract terms expressing transcendental ideas like the goodness of God, nefe-netcha, moral obligation, social equity, mayat, human kingship, nisat, and the concept of God, Ra, symbolized by the sun. Next, let's examine the first definition of a philosopher in history. The ancient Egyptians defined a philosopher, or rekh, or sai, as a wise human being. This is not just a matter of semantics. Over 2,000 years ago, the inscription of Antef provided the first clear and distinct definition of a philosopher. The German Egyptologist Helmut Brunner translated this inscription from the 12th dynasty, 1991 to 1782 BC, as follows. A philosopher is one whose heart understands things that others ignore, who is clear-sighted in deep problems, moderate in actions, knowledgeable of ancient writings, sought for advice, truly wise, self-taught, vigilant in seeking the right paths, surpassing past achievements, wiser than a sage, self-driven to wisdom, and sought for counsel. In ancient Egyptian thought, the heart was considered the seat of thoughts and emotions, also representing the mind, understanding, and intelligence. Reason, emotion, spirit, mind, and body were seen as interconnected, not separate or opposing entities. Philosophers used all these aspects in their inquiries to achieve fulfillment. Philosophical thinking in ancient Egypt was a critical undertaking, focusing on substantial issues rather than the obvious or superficial. Philosophers were expected to hold moderate views and champion truth, that is, ma'at. Ancient Egypt had a rich philosophical and scientific tradition. Philosophers were those who could understand ancient writings and use the knowledge within them. This created a philosophical tradition, a coherent body of teachings, also known as sebayet, that influenced contemporary thought. Early philosophers like Imhotep, Hor-Jedef, and Ptah-Hotep from the Old Kingdom, 2686 to 2181 BC, established the first philosophical tradition in history. Their wisdom was revered for over 1,000 years after their time. Books of wisdom, that is philosophy, were their pyramids, and the pen was their child. Is there anyone here like Hor-Jedef? Is there another like Imhotep? They are gone and forgotten, but their names through their writings cause them to be remembered. This clearly shows the presence of philosophical thought in the Nubio-Kemetic region of Africa, as well as its predating of Eastern or Western philosophy. But until recently, talking about African philosophy was still considered controversial. Efforts to explore African philosophy were dismissed as ethnophilosophy, implying that pre-colonial Africa had stories and proverbs but no real philosophy. Yet, sophisticated philosophical texts from Africa have existed for a long time. These texts, more elaborate than some early Greek fragments, include both written and oral traditions. Professor Théophile Obenga demonstrated the deep roots of African philosophy. Obenga's research highlights 5 main periods in African philosophical history. Chronologically, we can distinguish the following periods. Pharaonic era. This period begins with the Old Kingdom, 2780 to 2260 BCE, featuring the pyramid texts, the Shabaka stone, and the maxims or teachings of Kagemni and Ptah-Hotep, philosophers and thinkers of Alexandria, Cyrene, Carthage, and Hippo. The school of Alexandria thrived for over 6 centuries under the Greek Ptolemaic dynasty and the Roman Empire, reaching its zenith between 323 and 221 BCE. Key figures include Demetrius of Phaleron, Diodorus Cronus, Hegesias, Euclid, Manetho, Aristarchus, Archimedes, Sextus Empiricus, and Plutarch. The school of Cyrene, founded by Aristippus, a student of Socrates, contributed significantly to Greek thought. Notable figures include Theodorus the Atheist and Aristippus the Younger. Eratosthenes, a mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher from Cyrene, measured the Earth's circumference accurately. Carthage produced philosophers such as Claudius Maximus and Apuleius. Augustine, born in Thagaste and died in Hippo, meditated on human time and its relation to divine eternity. Maghrebi, philosophy. This period includes figures like Ibn Bajjah, Ibn Battuta, and the great historian and philosopher Ibn Khaldun, who wrote the Muqaddimah, a grand discourse on universal history. Medieval philosophical schools of Timbuktu, Gao, and Jenne. These centers of black Muslim culture continued the peripatetic tradition during the great Sudanese empires, Ghana, Mali, Gao, Songhai. Notable figures include Professor Mohammed Bagayogo and his student Ahmed Baba. Modern and contemporary African philosophy. This period features important names like Anton Wilhelm Amo, an 18th century Ghanaian philosopher, and Edward Wilmot Blyden, a 19th century thinker. The rediscovery of ancient Egypt, especially after the deciphering of hieroglyphs by Champollion, reinforces the idea that Egypt was the cradle of philosophical speculation as we know it. Thus, the African philosophical tradition, which majestically inaugurated systematic reflection on the world, nature, and humanity on the African continent, simultaneously laid the foundations of Greek philosophy. These periods show that African philosophy, particularly from pharaonic Egypt, predates Greek and Chinese philosophies by nearly 3 millennia and Hinduism by 2 millennia. Obenga's work showcased ancient texts like the Pyramid texts and the Book of the Dead, which are invaluable yet largely unknown to many. The Book of the Dead is the world's oldest illustrated book. It contains texts of different lengths, usually written on papyrus, and includes the name and titles of the deceased. These texts are prayers intended to guide the dead in the afterlife. Many of these texts date back to the First Intermediate Period and the Middle Kingdom, approximately 2300 to 1700 BCE. This includes the Coffin texts and the Book of Two Ways, compiled by the well-known Dutch Egyptologist Adriaan de Buck. Cheikh Anta Diop and Théophile Obenga were able to show that these texts are as philosophical as those traditionally recognized by Western history. Obenga's deep understanding of Western philosophy, thanks to his education under prominent Western philosophers, allowed him to effectively compare African philosophical texts with later Western ones. He demonstrated that early Greek philosophers were heavily influenced by Egyptian thought. Thus, it is fair to say that Egypt, not Greece, was the first cradle of philosophy. By emphasizing the Black and African character of pharaonic philosophy and its connection to contemporary African traditions, Obenga urged Africans to delve into their rich heritage. He encouraged the exploration of pharaonic philosophy and Black African oral traditions, such as the revelations of Ogotemeli, among others. The Pyramid texts describe the world before creation in mythological terms. Myths were the earliest forms of philosophy, offering insights into how ancient Egyptians understood the origins of the cosmos. The universe includes everything: the realm of the dead, the sky, the habitable earth, humans, ancestral gods, and death itself. People have always tried to understand how everything came to be. Often they imagine a creator who made the universe. This idea appears in many myths. Ancient Egypt had a unique idea. They imagined a universe before the current one, existing before any creator or creation. They thought of a primordial matter existing before time and space, from which everything emerged. This idea dates back to the Old Kingdom. In many African ethnic groupings, such as those of the Dogon, Bambara, Akan, and Bantu-speaking peoples, water plays a key role. Water and Nomo among the Dogon. The Dogon distinguish between water and Nomo, the life force. Without Nomo, the earth could not be created, as it was shaped and given life by water, Nomo. Central waters of the sky among the Bambara. Initially, the waters from the central sources of the sky were pure and beneficial. Today, only the first rains of the season are seen as purifying, bringing life to the earth and plants. Tano, the water god of the Akan. Tano, the great river god of Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, is considered a creator. Inscriptions honor Tano as pure and originating from the creator. Whirling waterhole among the Bantu Venda. For the Venda, and generally among the Bantu, the place of the first creation is a whirling waterhole or reed bed, located to the east. In Plato's Timaeus, he suggests that God did not create the primary matter, but organized pre-existing chaos into a harmonious cosmos. God only produced the secondary matter of bodies. Long before Greek philosophers, the Egyptians conceived of a primordial matter that could become the substance of creation. They imagined this matter existing before the Creator God's creation. Aristotle later noted a similar concept, recognizing a pre-world state that existed before the current world. Cicero also discussed the world and God as one, describing the world as a rational, wise being. In contrast, the Egyptians proposed that matter existed before any god or creation. They envisioned the Creator God emerging from this primordial, uncreated matter. How does African tradition perceive God? Is he seen only as an all-powerful Father in heaven, like in some revealed religions, or differently? Let's explore this perspective. In African ancestral spirituality, God is seen as the principle without which existence itself would not exist. He is the source of everything and sustains life every day. Firstly, our ancestors believed the divine principle to be unique, making their thought monotheistic. In a pharaonic text from the Bremner Rand papyrus, the divine principle, God, speaks, emphasizing that he alone is the creator of all things. I did all that I did, being alone, before anyone else had manifested himself into existence. This divine principle is something that creatures, including humans, cannot fully perceive because they are limited by their physical senses, hearing, sight, etc., which prevent them from fully understanding it. Thus, for our ancestors, the divine principle is a spiritual energy. Since this principle is energy, it is invisible. No creature has ever seen it. Unfathomable and unknowable. It cannot be fully and perfectly known. Pharaoh Akhenaten, in his famous hymn to Aten, said to God, "None of those whom you have begotten sees you." For our ancestors, the divine principle is hidden and mysterious. They called it Amun, meaning hidden, not as a name, but as a descriptive title of its nature. Our ancestors believed that to name something, they needed to understand its nature. Since they considered the divine principle to be invisible and elusive, they called it Amun to describe these qualities. An excerpt from the praise of Amun from the Leiden Papyrus says, "One is Amun, who is hidden from them, without knowing its true appearance." The divine principle is unique and hidden, containing the origin of all things. It is also androgynous, meaning both male and female, allowing it to create all existing things, humans, animals, plants, etc. An excerpt from the Pyramid Texts, the oldest religious text in history, says, "You are the father and mother of men." The unique creator is both female, mother, and male, father, at the same time. Traditional African marriage reflects this unity of male and female nature, embodying divine androgyny. This allows the couple to create, give birth to children, just as the Creator creates humans. The symbolism of Amun includes his dual male and female nature, often depicted as a couple, representing monogamous marriage. The divine principle has several forms and manifestations, often misunderstood due to widespread ignorance. For our ancestors, the divine principle contains the origin of all creation. The Creator made everything according to his creative potentials, resulting in diverse creations. Plants, animals, humans, etc. This diversity in creation means that the Creator has various manifestations and ways of being, doing, existing, and acting. This view is supported by many specialists who have extensively studied documents and sacred texts from the pharaonic period. For instance, French experts Jean-Claude Goyon and Jean-Claude Golvin, in their book The Builders of Karnak, stated, "The innumerable forms of the divinity are what has been wrongly called the Egyptian pantheon. It does not exist." In other words, the pharaonic texts reveal that the spirituality of our ancestors in the Nile Valley did not include a pantheon of multiple gods. Similarly, Eugène Grébeau, in the preface to his translation of the hymn to Amun-Ra from the papyri of the Egyptian Museum of Bulaq, notes that Amun, the god of the hymn, and Ptah, whom the hymn recognizes as an earlier form, are two designations of the one God, or mysterious soul, whom the Egyptians worshipped alone, and who, they said, has no name. They conceived him by his acts, in his functions, each of which, as manifesting the divine soul, received a name, forming a god, a proof grasped by the elusive being. The gods are the persons, or the roles in which the unique, invisible, unnamed God is revealed by acting in various ways. Cheikh Anta Diop also affirmed this in his book, Nations Nègres et Culture. Monotheism, in all its abstraction, already existed in Egypt. Those who claim that our ancestors in the Nile Valley and Africa were polytheists are either uninformed or have never read or understood the spiritual texts from the pharaonic era, even though translations of these texts are available. Furthermore, the divine principle contains within itself the origin of all things and sustains their existence. The essence of everything in nature, ecosystems, plants, animals, humans, comes from this principle and is animated by its energy. As stated in the Praise of God from the Leiden Papyrus, every creature glories in him in order to magnify itself by impregnating itself with his divine perfection. Thus, all of nature is divine and sacred, demanding respect, ecological principle. Disrespecting nature offends the divine principle within it. The human being is also divine, so killing or enslaving a person offends the divine principle within them. The divine principle permeates the entire universe, making all beings and things vibrate with life. For our ancestors, this meant that the divine principle is the essence of all things, originating and giving life to everything, and present within everything. This presence is not confined to heaven, but is found everywhere. Our ancestors believed they lived in the continual presence of God every day. The entire universe, therefore, vibrates with the presence of divine energy, according to our ancestors. Even today, among all the peoples of the earth, it is the Black African who can most comprehensively demonstrate the deep connection between his culture and that of pharaonic Egypt. These two cultures are so closely linked that they can serve as reciprocal systems of reference. The Black African uniquely recognizes himself within the Egyptian cultural universe. He feels a profound sense of belonging and familiarity there, unlike anyone else, whether they be Indo-European or Semitic. Just as a Westerner, when reading a text by Kete, feels the resonance of his ancestral soul, so too do the psychology and culture revealed by Egyptian texts resonate with the Black personality. Until the lions have their own historians, the tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter.